Peace, peace. This is your brother Logic, Logyc, and I'm going to do a video presentation of today in history. And today we're going to talk about one of our ancestors, one of our brothers who fought in the American Civil War, and his name is Spotswood Rice. As the entire nation went to war, slaves in Missouri, a border state where slavery was legal until 1865, remained in bondage. The story of Spotswood Rice illustrates the Civil War experience of one such slave and his personal battle to liberate himself and his family. Waged without certainty of success within a legal framework that denied his freedom even as neighbor fought neighbor on the Missouri-Kansas border, Spotswood Rice and his family represent the courage of African-American slaves who were willing to risk everything for freedom. Spotswood Rice was born through slavery in Virginia on November 20th, 1819, and moved with his family to Missouri when he was quite young. He lived on the plantation of Benjamin Lewis, where he worked as a tobacco roller. In 1852, Spotswood married Orrie Ferguson, and together they had 7 children. Orrie and her children were owned by members of the Diggs family in Glasgow, Missouri. For the first 12 years of their marriage, they lived apart, as was common with Missouri slave couples. As a result, Spotswood was only allowed to visit his family 2 nights each week. Years later, their daughter, Mary Bell, shared her memories of these visits with a Works Progress Administration interviewer. The abuse Spotswood suffered from the slave driver on Benjamin Lewis's plantation drove him to run away on several occasions in the attempt to reach free Kansas. Even after the Militia Act of 1862 allowed employment of African American men in the service of the Union Army, the status of Missouri slaves remained muddy. A second Confiscation Act passed at the same time, only freed slaves of disloyal citizens. Slaves of loyal citizens had to have their owners' permission to join the Union Army. When the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 was implemented, it did not free Missouri slaves, but it did suspend enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act, making it possible for Rice to run for freedom to the Union lines. In February 1864, he finally gained his freedom by enlisting in the 67th Regiment of the United States Colored Infantry. Unfortunately, since slaves in the slaveholding border states had not been freed, Rice's family, like the families of many African American soldiers, continued in bondage after his enlistment. Spotswood was assigned in the Benton Barracks Hospital in St. Louis, where he worked as a military nurse and was eventually hospitalized with chronic rheumatism. By September 1864, Orrie and all but 2 of their daughters, Mary, 12, and Cora, 23, managed to reach St. Louis, where Orrie worked as a laundress to support the family. From his hospital bed, Rice continued the battle to have Mary and Cora reunited with the rest of the family. He wrote to them with words of affection, reassuring them that they had not been abandoned, and passionately expressed his desire to free them, writing, "Be assured that I will have you if it costs me my life." In defiance of Diggs' wish to keep the girls, he said, "She is the first Christian that I ever heard say that a man could steal his own children, especially out of human bondage." He believed that 800 white and 800 black Union soldiers would come to the plantation and rescue them. At the same time, Spotswood wrote a letter filled with threats of retribution to Kitty Diggs, who owned his daughter Mary. Miss Diggs' brother, F.W. Diggs, the postmaster of Glasgow, owned Rice's daughter Cora. Angered by Rice's threats against his sister, Diggs forwarded the letters to General Rosecrans, commander of the Department of Missouri, demanding that Rice be sent out of the state. Filed away in the military records, the 3 documents survived to inform history and testified to the hostility between slaves and their former owners during the tumultuous Civil War experience. They also demonstrate the deep bonds that African American families form, even when forced to endure the separation of abroad marriages, as well as the battles these families undertook to reestablish their families during and after the Civil War. Rice was successful in his efforts, is evidenced by the 1880 census, which reported Rice and Orrie living in St. Louis with their children, including Cora, 39, and Mary, 28. The letters also demonstrate Rice's effort to exert his manhood as a free citizen, a status he believed that he had earned through his military service to the Union. In this, too, he was successful. After leaving the Army in May 1865, Spotswood Rice joined the African Methodist Church of St. Louis and became a licensed and local preacher, being ordained deacon in 1870 or 1874. In 1871, he had charge of the Savannah, Missouri mission. He was ordained an elder in 1876 when he was pastor of the Washington, Missouri circuit. In 1879, he was transferred to Canton, Missouri. In 1881, he was pastor of St. Peter's Chapel in St. Louis. In 1882, he was transferred to the State Line Church in Kansas City, Missouri, a part of the Kansas Congress. In October 1882, he was appointed to pastor of the church at Parsons, Kansas. Later in the 1880s, Rice founded the first AME mission in New Mexico, which became Grant Chapel AME. On March 19, 1888, Ory died. Rice later remarried. By 1901, he had moved to Colorado Springs, where he founded another church. Rice died on October 31st, 1907.